the second day of this wonderful event. My name's Paul Drury and I write for Retro Gamer magazine. And Ravi Abbott, the organiser of this wonderful event, he said, Paul, would you mind hosting the talks on the Sunday? Because I predict that I will be massively hungover. And I'm pleased to confirm he is massively hungover. Not only is it a pleasure to help out Ravi, it's also a pleasure because I get to introduce not one but two brilliant guests today. The first one is a man who has spent 40 years, surely you must have started when you were 6, 40 years in the games business. He's worked on a huge array of games and over a huge number of platforms, including our beloved Amiga. So without further ado, will you please give a huge welcome to Simon Phipps.
Hi guys. Thanks everybody for coming and everything. I'll hopefully give you some stuff about me and everything. I'll put together this little presentation because you might be thinking you have some questions. Who the heck's this? How did he get into games? How did he end up here? And maybe what am I doing here, especially after drinking last night? So I'll try and answer some of those questions in about 30 minutes or less. Let's go. Okay, so in 1975, that's me. I'm aged 9. I always wanted to make cartoons in that 70s sort of stuff, but I've always been wanting to draw and make cartoons and everything. I was really into stuff like Hanna-Barbera, the original Tom and Jerry. In 1974, Bob Godfrey's do-it-yourself film animation show. There was an incredible show when I was about 8, told you how to make your own movies and stuff using cutout animation. And I remember distinctly, and had quite an influence on me, the Terry Gilliam episode where he showed you how to make your own cartoons by cutting things out of newspapers and moving them around. And then the artwork of a guy called Ken Reed, who, if you ever remember Whizzer and Chips and Whoopee Comic, he contributed to, and he did these amazing monster drawings. And I was like, oh, so I taught myself how to draw like that. In addition, Guillermo Modillo, if you ever went into an Athena or a Woolworths and went through the poster racks, there were 4 or 5 drawings by this guy of little squat men in hats. That will be important later. Goscinny and Uderzo, Asterix the Gaul, I ate those things alive. And then for those anime people out there, there was a series on the BBC in the 1970s called Marine Boy, which was kind of the first sort of touch that I had with Japanese animation. And very, very few people remember it, but it's stuck there somewhere in my brain and also comes into play. Anyway, Christmas Eve 1977, I went and bought that for 98p. My dad gave me £1. I went round, 95p. Went to the local newsagents, bought the official collector's edition, and it kind of blew my mind. And I opened it up, and it got pictures of this amazing concept art, guys making models using model kits and working together to achieve something, and just bringing stories to life in ways that I'd never seen. I was like, this is brilliant. Which then got me into Star Wars. So from about 78 to 80, I became obsessed with it. I collected all the things. I still got some of them as well. I drew pictures, made spaceships out of old model kits, getting balsa wood and sticking bits to them, spraying them and everything. And I desperately wanted an 8mm film camera because all this sort of stuff, I wanted to make my own little Star Wars. I never got one. So in 1981, I went round to my friend Phil Basker's house. Phil and his dad had made this ZX81, a 1K version of the classic Sinclair computer from a kit. And he was like, you've got to see this, it's amazing. And he brought up this Space Invaders, a 1K Space Invaders, which every time you touched the key to make it move, the screen went to static and it updated. I was like, this is magic. Phil, can I change what the Space Invaders look like? It's like, yeah. I was like, this is the route forward. So at the time I got a paper round, I saved every penny I'd got, and in 1982 I got a BBC Model A. My mum and dad put about 75 quid to it so I could get the thing. I was hoping for an Acorn Electron, they went, no, here's the money, you can have a BBC Model A. And I got a Saturday job at First Byte Computers over in the main centre in Derby at the same time. There I met a load of guys that I'm still friends with, and we've worked together for many, many years afterwards. Terry Lloyd, Rob Toon, Chris Shrigley and Andy Green. They were regulars in the store on a Saturday, and we all got together and you kind of hanging out talking about all the latest Commodore titles and stuff. And then Christmas of 82, I bought a Microvitec RGB monitor. I'd been running it on a big black and white telly for 7 months, this amazing colour computer. The only thing was I had to lug that all the way across Derby to get it to my dad's car, and it's like gigantic in a gigantic box and really heavy. But all of a sudden switched it on. So what I did was then I thought, well, okay, I can't make movies on this thing. I'll copy what I'm seeing in the arcade. So I started to teach myself BASIC and did sort of like a Snake game here called Grid Wars, a thing where I was flying a spaceship around with sprites and stuff. And then I started selling my games to magazines because, of course, back then you could see all these listings. I was like, hello, I've got some games that I've made. And they went, okay, we'll pay £50 a page, I think it was at the time. I was like, okay, here's a listing. Here's a big article on how I actually wrote the listing. Here's a load of drawings that I made. So I could multiply up how many pages I was getting worth. So I actually made a little bit of money out of that, which was really good fun. And carried on working at First Byte, and actually, like Just Micro did, where they spawned off Gremlin Graphics, First Byte, the shop, also tried to spawn their own First Byte computers. So I actually did a little basic game called Star Force Lander for them, and then drew the box art and the First Byte software, and it was all kind of in that Ken Reed style. Anyway, whilst there was still, and I was 1984, so that was the year I turned 18, but just before then, I'd been working on a game that was finally released called Jet Power Jack. I've been using the BBC Micro's BASIC because it's really, really fast in comparison to anything else that was out there. But one of the things was I wanted to make colour sprites that would actually show up on screen rather than just doing the single colour that you could do using the character stuff. So I taught myself how to use 6502 assembler and wrote sprite routines that would allow me to make more colourful graphics. So anyway, I was just working on this little game. This guy goes from one side of the screen to the other, picks up a fuel pod, flies back, refuels a starship, etc. And my friend Stu Gregg used to come round of an evening. He was at sixth form with me, and we'd play Chucky Egg, and I'd show him what I was doing. He was like, one day, he said, you should send that into a publisher. I'm sure they'd pay you for it. I was like, no. He said, no, do it. So like, okay. So I stuck it on a tape and sent it off to ANF Software and Micropower in Leeds. ANF came back and said, nah, it's got to be 100% machine code because we can't protect it. Micropower, a lovely guy named Simon Heaton, wrote me back a letter and said, oh, we've got like 10 suggestions. If you do this, we'll give you, I think it was a 20% royalty, and you can, we'll publish it. I was like, okay. So I took on board what they did it, and bless them, they published it. So my first game, whilst I was still at school, doing my A-levels, and that helped to buy my first car, which was a little Vauxhall Chevette, which I had to take the engine out and put in and stuff like that. So 85 to 87. Well, because I'd spent so much time with computers, my A-levels completely blew chunks. My pure maths teacher was also the computer teacher, so I spent most of my time doing my pure maths lessons, prepping him for the next lesson in computers. So anyway, I came out with terrible, terrible stuff. I've got 2 O-levels in maths, if that's any help. Chose completely the wrong subjects, not an A-level in art or anything like that. But my backstop was Trent Polytechnic, just in the centre of Nottingham, because I'm from around here. And went over there to do a HND in computer studies. It was a great course. Everybody was from industry. They really knew what they were doing, all coursework based, and I just dived into all of this stuff. Halfway through, I had a sandwich year, and I got the opportunity to work as part of my work placement for IBM. That was IBM in Nottingham. They had no programming places, just a place in marketing, but it was like going to work for Google and Facebook. And my lecturer turned around and said, well, because your coding is good enough, we're not really worried about you. Would you like to take this opportunity? So, yeah, that was me. So there I am. Whoop, hang on. In a suit, along with all the kind of YTS people and other graduates working in their marketing programs department. So that was a year of dismantling PCs, putting them back together again, ordering cheese sandwiches and supporting the sales force. At the end of the year, they said, oh, when you've finished your course, you're welcome to come back. And I'm like, I never see myself working for a multinational, gigantic American corporation ever in my career, ever, no. But thank you very much, you're all lovely. So anyway, I went back and did the final year, came out, smashed it, and then thought, well, what do? I want to go into some kind of serious computing or something like that kind of thing, because my mates who had worked at First Byte had gone off, made a game called Bounder, were working for Gremlin Graphics at the time, and that was like, hey, that's cool, but it's not a real job. And how do you get a job in games or whatever? I'll just carry on my experiments and do what I'm doing, but see where it goes. So I got a job writing BCPL for a company called Lasermaker in Long Eaton down the way. And what they were doing at the time was trying to develop a graphical interface for a typesetting thing. It's really boring. It's all about kerning and stuff. But one of the highlights was sitting there with a couple of the programmers trying to decide what happened when you right-clicked a mouse, because that had never been defined before at that point. Anyway, there I am in a queued farm. And one night, I got a call from Terry Lloyd. Now, that's not Terry. He's actually much more jacked than that. But Terry phoned me up and said, hey, Simon, said, you still, computing and all that? I was like, yeah, I've got an Atari ST. I'm doing a few bits and pieces, trying to understand how to make it work, but I'm not a big hardware guy, so I can only do so much and everything. So, well, we're making Master of the Universe, the movie, here at Derby, because what had happened was, they'd gone to, got a job after Bounder, started working on things like Jack the Nipper 2, and they'd been commuting to Sheffield, and the guys at Gremlin said, why don't we open a small Derby satellite office? You go and work there, and it saves you the commute, and everybody's happy. So they're like, cool. So I went over to see the guys. I remember one night, myself and my fiancée at the time, Jane, we scuttered around in the snow, taking a disc over to Terry. A few days later, do you want to come in, meet all of the gang? And that's what we did, and we really got on. I thought I was getting a freelance job. They said, no, full-time job. I was like, oh, right, hang on a minute. So I've got this kind of dilemma. Do I stay in the cube farm here, or I jump into the game grid? What am I going to do? So Jane and I had a little conflab and went, well, what's the worst going to happen? Let's just give it a go. And we've managed to give it a go for the past 36 years, I'm very, very pleased to say. So dived in thinking, okay, then we can see what happens with this, but I can always go back to the World Series computing if the thing. So I joined at Gremlin Graphics in 87 to 88 and started being a graphic artist full-time at the time. So I worked on Master of the Universe, the movie, working on a lot of the various different bits and fill-in sort of stuff. I was working on an Atari ST because I was familiar with the graphics packages, and there was a great package called OCP Art Studio which allowed you to do all sorts of different sprite animations and stuff. Worked on Skate Crazy, which was a dual disc game where it had two games on one disc that were part of the thing. I was on the scrolling level on the back there, worked with a lovely guy called Kevin Bulmer, who taught me an awful lot about sprite work. And then and the end of that kind of thing was Knight Raider, which was a simulation game that Gremlin brought in from some PC Canadian company, if I recall. And basically this was kind of cramming it into a tiny Spectrum. In the background, I'd been having experiences with things like Spectrum and Commodore drawing packages, and thought, I don't want to touch a rubber keyboard. So by talking to Andy Green, who's one of the coders, he gave me a little bit of code which allowed me to disable all the bits of hardware and annoying stuff that were in the Atari ST, and basically give me full control over the machine. So what I then started doing was, whilst I was working on these things, to get around the inconveniences of having to work on multiple machines, wrote some software that I could draw all my art on the Atari ST, press a button, and then spit out the Spectrum, the Amstrad, the Amiga, and basically just hand out everybody discs of the files that they needed in the format they needed it, because it was so much nicer than working with a rubber keyboard. So, anyway, that didn't last for long. In 1988, Gremlin hit a cash flow crisis, and unfortunately they had to close the office down. And so that's kind of like the last day with myself, Rob Toon, Chris Shrigley, Terry, and Andy with the demolished Gremlin thing, as we're trying to contemplate what they want to do. Gremlin were lovely about it. They turned around and said, look, you guys can come to Sheffield and work for us and do the hour-long commute backwards and forwards every day in the 80s, which just wasn't a thing. Or you can take the redundancy. We're like, well, thank you very much. We'll take the redundancy. And I was starting to think about, okay, I'll go back. It's been fun. We'll go back into serious computing. Anyway, one evening, Greg Holmes, who was our office manager, Kevin Norman, who was one of the founders of Gremlin, and a guy named Jeremy Heath-Smith, who was the sales manager at Gremlin, came down and said, right, guys, if you want, we can set up a company here and you guys can work for us. Are you up for that? And we were like, okay, let's give it a go. So, 1988, I made Rick Dangerous. So this was Core's first title. This is my first proper Amiga title. Because I've been teaching myself how to code in the background, that meant that I coded the Atari and Amiga versions, did all of the sprite graphics and the title screen work, and Terry did all the background art, and then design was done by Rob Toon, Bob Church, and we all had kind of an opinion, sort of input on that. We turned it around in 4 months, and there's a whole load of stories out there about how we came up with it, but it was basically me and Terry sitting there going, right, okay, then what's out at the moment? There were things like Black Tiger by Capcom had just come out, so that ruled out Sword and Sorcery. And we realised we've never done, there's never been a really good Indiana Jones film full of traps and stuff like that kind of thing. Let's have a go at one. and that's how we made the little fella. So yeah, 5 formats, I think 5 or 6 formats. There's about 5 or 6 of us all gunning along. In 4 months, we turned that thing out, and it's followed me ever since. Oh, and by the way, little kind of thing, the wah when you fall off the screen was me. Terry and I basically got a condenser microphone. Okay, hang on, 1, 2, 3, wah! There we are. So yeah, we got a little tiny condenser microphone tape recorder, jammed a tape in, and me and Terry in the back office just after lunch going, like this, and we took the funniest sample, and mine was the most ludicrous, and it's followed me around the interwebs ever since, and I'm truly grateful for it. It is my space oddity. In 1989, core design, whilst I was still working on core design, I published Switchblade through Gremlin. The first game I actually started writing was Switchblade, which was a flick screen game for the ST and then converted to the Amiga. And basically, I was writing that in my spare time at Gremlin when I'd started to get myself into coding, and then ran alongside several projects like Rick Dangerous, which meant that I was working on really novice, ugly code at home and working on much more developed, much more experienced code at work. And I was actually in a situation where I was about 2/3 of the way through. I'm like, I could go back and rewrite all of this sort of stuff, or just suck it up and just grind my way out to the end. So that's what I did with this thing. All the Marine Boy influences came in with the anime and the manga and stuff like that kind of stuff. It's a flick screen game. It borrows from the Spectrum game Ranorama, where it obscured bits of screen that you hadn't got to yet and switched them back on again, and featured all these little sort of cyberpunky kind of anime sprites. Core couldn't actually afford to develop it, so we actually struck a deal with Gremlin for them, those guys to publish it, and so Switchblade came out whilst we were in flight. One of the greatest things of my career was Saints and Grizzlies football trivia game. As we are here in the home of football, you'll know that we've got a great love of football. At that time, things like Championship Manager and Football Manager and all the football games were making really good money. And Jeremy, who was the boss, came to us and said, right, we've got 2 options on the table. One of which is Gremlin want us to do a Guardian Angels-based Streets of Rage style beat-em-up, or we can do 2 really quick and easy Championship Manager football type games that will make us loads of money. We're like, tell you what, we all hate football, but we'll do this. So the first of these was St. Greasy's football trivia quiz game, which was based around a trivia game based around Ian St. John and Jimmy Greaves, who were the pundits at the time on the ITV Sports, asking you questions about football. There were 2,000 of them. So we had 10 weeks to get this all crammed into the memory of a Spectrum. And so what happened was I ended up coding Atari and Amiga, did all the graphics for everything, and then Dave Pridmore, who was our Z80 programmer, worked out a way to compress all of this text into tiny bytes, and poor old Kevin Norburn, who was our boss, had to sit in the back corner typing in 2,000 trivia questions into the format that we needed to get them through. So anyway, we shot that through, and the night before Jane and I got married, Jane is standing there at my desk going, we're going now, 5:30, so we went gold on that thing, shot it out, and I ended up getting a copy from the boys at work at my wedding do as like a present. It was like, it just turned up with this gigantic box and went, here you are. I'm thinking, okay, thanks, it's really heavy, I don't know what it is. Yeah, my own football trivia quiz game, woohoo! Suffice to say, we never got to do a second football trivia quiz game. Biggest, hardest project after that was Monty Python's Flying Circus, the computer game. Jeremy came to me one day and said, right, we've got Virgin on the line. They want us to do one of 2 things. We either do Judge Dredd or Monty Python. I'm going, Judge Dredd. I love 2000 AD. I've been there. We got Monty Python. First thing that Virgin said to us as well, we don't want it to be anything like Rick Dangerous. We're like, okay, right. So what I did was, how do I get myself into Python? I kind of dabbled with a bit of Python. I'd done the parrot sketch, knew a bit of the cheese sketch. On the side, I could identify a larch, but that was about it. So I went and got hold of all the VHSs of the thing and went home and decided my responsibility was to become the biggest fan of Monty Python, so I had 48 hours. I sat down, watched every single one of the discs, went through, made copious notes of every single thing that happened with time code so I could go back to it. These are all the characters and everything like that. What came out was that the Pythons had only all played one human character together, and that was Gumby. So what we did was we proposed that we actually take Gumby and make him the star of the game. And then what we do is we rip his head off in a Terry Gilliam style, throwback to 1974, and then put his head on various different things. So he could run around in a platform game, he could have his head on the body of a fish, so you had an inverted gravity, you could have a flying game, and there was a thing on a spring type sort of thing, and kind of inspired by stuff like Mr. Heli, which was in the arcades at the time, kind of do that sort of stuff and make the game focused around the control. Now, every single meeting I had with Virgin and go down to their lovely offices in Notting Hill would basically, after about 5 minutes, turn into, this is make a great video, make a great mini game. Have you heard the Spanish Inquisition? Have you heard the argument sketch? And so people would start reciting stuff. And so what we were kind of trying to do in a very short space of time was cram into a spectrum something that would be the kind of complexity and breadth of, say, Monkey Island with about 100 mini games in. And it was like, we can't do this. We're going to have to stick to a guns and try and make the thing work. Well, after months and months and months of trying to make the controls work, I think they had a change of producer, and one of the producers came back and said, you know what, could you put some of that kind of trap sort of gameplay and sort of puzzles that you had in Rick Dangerous? I was like, yes. So we then took on a new tack and attacked it again. And actually, the team had to be the lovely guys. I had to have immense patience with me because we were trying to kind of just thrash our way through what a Python game was. We kind of got a load of bits and pieces. I'd actually come up with an animation player which allowed us to do all the cutout style animation, so there were all this sort of stuff. And in the spirit of the TV show, there were triggers that would happen randomly throughout a level that would play a cartoon that may or may not be relevant to the gameplay whatsoever, and stuff. And I actually kept a tally, and I think we got about 200 Monty Python references between what the things what characters look like and everything, all the way through. So from a personal achievement of trying to honour the franchise, we did it. But yeah, we were kind of running out of time. It was the longest project we'd ever done. And there was a situation where we were all struggling with it. I had one meeting with Virgin, and suddenly it clicked what we needed to do. So I went to Greg Holmes, who was the office manager, and said, Greg, I've got a plan. We're probably not going to like it. I'm not going to like it, but I think it will get us through. Give me 4 weeks. I will go home. I will work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I will design all the art, all the levels, all the scripting, all the animation. I will come in on a Monday, deliver the discs to everybody. If those guys then implement it, and we do that for 4 weeks and turn it out. So the guys had to just put a load of faith in me, have a load of patience with me, and I'm eternally grateful for that. But eventually, after 9 months, we got it out the door, and it went out there. And it is truly one of the strangest things I've ever made, but I'm quite pleased that at the end of it, honoured the look of Terry Gilliam and got the spirit of the game through, even if the gameplay isn't the greatest. It was a very interesting thing to work on. Then came Rick Dangerous 2. Microprose, who'd published it, came to us and said, we want a sequel to Rick. And we were like, brilliant, okay, then what can we do? Decision I came up with was to actually set him in space, take him on a Flash Gordon type journey, rather than doing the same thing over again. Where would his kind of cinematic journey take him to? And so there's a whole spoof on This Island Earth, all of the Flash Gordon series. We did sort of level select so you could jump in and out of different levels. We had a bad guy. One of the great things about the original Rick Dangerous was it came with a little tiny comic book drawn by Halo Jones creator Ian Gibson, and for that he created a guy called the Fat Guy. And we're like, hey, that's cool, we've actually got a villain. So we made him the villain for Rick. Dave Pridmore did an excellent job on coming up with the trap system. We basically said, here are all the things that we couldn't do with the last one, and he's giant computer brain just got on it, came up with a system, wrote it, and then basically for the next, once he got it working on the Z80 version, said, right, sit with me for a couple of days, I will talk you through my code line by line, and then it will work out how to decode all of this data I've done. And to this day, I think Dave was the only person with his matrix-like brain that could actually figure out how it worked. But it worked, and it allowed us to turn Rick around in really efficiently on the team. I'd say on this one again, I did the Amiga and ST programming, the sprite graphics, Terry returned for the backgrounds, and we had the Robs doing all of the design work as far as I remember. The other thing about the artwork, yes, it was a complete surprise to us when the realistic artwork turned up for the Rick Dangerous stuff, because we did a little squat sort of cartoony fat guy, and he ended up looking like Flash Gordon for real or Indiana Jones for real. But actually it was kind of cool that Microprose at least maintained a continuity with the art. And say, as goes, the one question I do get asked, did you ever want to do a Rick Dangerous 3? The truth was, nobody asked us to do one. So Rick is kind of enters the teleport at the end and goes off. I had thoughts of, could we do some sort of like detective 1940s kind of Casablanca style, something or other, but it was just one of those kind of things. The project never got asked for and we moved on. Whoops, hang on a second, back from there. So 1991, my first 3D thing. We had two amazing guys come to work for us at Core, Mark Avery and Sean Dunleavy. They turned up with an almost fully functioning 3D engine with an amazing helicopter simulator. And we were like, hey, we've got this. I'm like, come along, you're hired. So I was brought on board at that time to help work with the design. And one of the things we realized was the code and the work that the guys had done was so spectacular, we really wanted to show it off. Back then, things like helicopter simulations were, you start here, you press about 1 million keys to get your helicopter up into the air, and then you've got to go for 25 minutes looking for a dot before it comes zooming in, goes off the screen, and then the objective completed and fly back and complicated. With this stuff, we decided to bring you into the mission area and get you in amongst the 3D objects, so everything was kind of action-based. So my kind of stuff was mission design and a lot of the scripting and the heads-up display and stuff like that kind of thing, but those guys did the work. Greatest thing about this one was max code for the 3D engine. It had 2 comments in it. The 3D engine, the next bit. Everything else was straight code with no commenting. Amazing talent. 92 to 93, I worked on Wolfchild. So I've been wanting to kind of break away from tiny, squat, fat platforming game type men and wanting to play around with things like anime. Manga had now started coming in a lot more, and so I ended up doing the artwork and design and stuff for Wolfchild. With this one, I'd actually wanted to do the whole thing, but the games had started to get too big, and I was told, look, you can't do all the art, all the design, all the programming, you're going to have to drop a thing. So I turned around and said, well, look, you've got better programmers than me, so I'll take on the art and the design. And in fact, actually, I paired up with my school friend, John Kirkland, and we worked together to do Wolfchild. This is about a guy that's kind of running around lots of parallax scrolling fields on the Amiga. It's actually the first time really I'd played around with the copper list, because the restrictions of the other games had meant that they were as kind of like, make what the Atari ST is capable of, and nothing very much more. But for this, we kind of did some layers of parallax and actually drew the sprites specifically for the Amiga first, and then took them over to the Atari ST, whereas before it was always 16 colours on the Atari and take them the other way. So anyway, yeah, John and I worked on this together, trying to think whatever little stories. Oh yes, and the title basically came from this guy called Bob Churchill who worked with us. He was a designer on things like Chuck Rock and stuff like that. He was massively into all this goth music, had a belt with the word Wolfchild written across the thing. I was like, that's cool, and that was enough to kind of spark that with Altered Beast and some of the platformers I liked, kind of put all that together. And yeah, I worked on that. The thing that was outstanding about Wolfchild was after we'd shipped the Amiga and ST, basically we ended up having to convert it to many different formats. So I probably spent another about 12 months packing extra pixel detail and extra colors into things like the SNES version. Most fun experience was packing all of it into a master system, which is about this much hardware, this much sprite power, with Sean Dunleavy, and it was quite a thrill being able to take this gargantuan little set of graphics and just mash it down into something that really shouldn't. Well, your watch is more powerful now. Then worked with Rich Morton and Stephen Walker on Asterix and the Power of the Gods. Hey, there's something I can remember. So with this one, Core had already done one Asterix platformer, and they were coming up to do another one. Sega had asked them, and one of the things was I was kind of asked on board to help out with the design. Being an Asterix fan, as I was like, you know what every Asterix game needs? It needs a big quest and a big map of Europe to start on, so you have to be going around and chasing all this stuff. So what I did, got a big stack of all of the Asterix books I could get my hands on, and then went through piece by piece by piece, reacquainting myself with it, becoming the biggest fan of it I possibly could do. And I thought, if we're going to have a quest, oh, by the way, Asterix and the Power of the Gods, they came up with a name first and said, we want a game based on this. I was like, okay. I found a quote in one of the Asterix things, which was, to betray Caesar is to betray the power of the gods. I was like, I've got that, right. So I cited that as this kind of thing. How do you defeat Caesar? You need the magic potion. So then I went through all this big stack of Asterix books, and on every panel and every page I documented what the magic potion ingredient was. So I had a huge list of ingredients. They became the quest items. We then worked out a set of levels. I designed some kind of, it's the first time I'd ever done this, extraneous threads within the adventure so we could prioritize which ones we're doing. So inevitably when we had to cut it, we could just lop off an entire arm of the game and never notice. And we sent this through. The lovely thing was we went through, it got out, and then we had a wonderful fax actually came through from Les Editions Albert René, that were the publishers. They'd had their Asterix Con and they wanted to write to us to thank us from doing the most authentic Asterix game they'd ever seen at that time. Total win. I felt kind of rather happy about that. Then in 1984, Bubba and Sticks. This was a joke that backfired. So if you remember the era of kind of flashback and digitized video where programmers run up and down a car park, film themselves, and then you'd have like a vectorized programmer running up and down a car park as your main hero. That was kind of in vogue, and Jeremy, who was the boss of Core, kept coming to me going, you know what, we should do kind of a thing where you have an adventurer that runs around in this kind of motion captured, well, not motion captured, rotoscope style, and he could have like a stick and he could do all these amazing things, and this idea just never went away. And I was like, I've already done Rick Dangerous's and platforms, I'd like to play with 3D or something really cool. And they're going, yeah, but there's this guy with a stick and everything. So it wouldn't go away. And one evening my friend Billy Allison and I went, right, let's put paid to this. Billy, I'd met, he'd joined Core. He'd come from the world of cartoon animation and got an amazing brain full of like these crazy wild monsters and ideas, very much like all that Ken Reed stuff. And so we went round to my house one Tuesday evening, I think it was, got a massive piece of paper and basically brainstormed all of the things that you could do with a stick. Some of which were impossible, some of which were potentially illegal, and some of which were just implausible. But one of the things, obviously, if you're using a physical stick, how long's the stick? What happens when you throw it away? You know, can you pole vault with it? Will it extend? If you poke it into a thing, can you balance on it? All of those kind of things. So we thought, well, we'll draw cartoons of all of these ridiculous things and prove that you can't do it with a stick in a realistic thing. So we went to Jeremy and went, yeah, here you go. This is what you can do with a stick, but quite frankly, rotoscoped animation, I'm thinking, I don't want to spend half of October running up and down the car park and then watching myself running, you know, kind of thing, and tracing over and stuff like that. So it's never going to work. He went, no, but that will. So Bubba and Sticks was born. So for this one, I was doing all the utilities programming, the map editing and the design. Billy did all of the foreground art, all the animations and everything. I did the background art and the map screen. And it was basically myself, Billy Allison, Mark Watson and John Kirkland locked in a room for about 9 months going insane on shortcake biscuits and tea. And it was genuinely one of the most hysterical times I've ever had in the games industry, with this little tiny box, just laughing our heads off all the day, just packing in the most obscure and weird stuff. And I can get so far playing it on, you know, coming back on emulator, but some of the puzzles, I have no idea how they work. I'm sure somebody on the internet's got it. But no, an absolute joy. And on that, I learned so much about animation from Billy Watts. We were working on it. So then into the next period of core design was kind of like 94 to 95. So I worked on Dragonstone. This was basically picking up the artwork from the original creator. They'd already done some kind of, I think it was an Amiga-based RPG kind of thing with a tremendously talented artist who worked out of house. He'd started this and then had to go and get a job in America. And in the days before the internet, we had to pick it up. So I think it was myself and Barry Irvin jumped in. Barry did all the coding. I started working on the graphics and did a load of the design of the back end of the game to get us through to finishing that one. And then I ended up without a team, but with a gigantic Silicon Graphics workstation, because at that time Donkey Kong Country had landed and everybody was buying up SGI workstations because they made games better. So I'm sitting there on my own with this big machine going, I don't know what to do with it. We'd got the BC Racers engine at that time, which did loads of scaling sprites and stuff like that kind of thing, and it was what can we make using that? Toby had already come on board with BC Racers, and I looked at it and was like, actually, do a tank game. So actually used the scrolling floor and spent the time learning 3D and Wavefront, building tanks and characters, and basically filling out a whole sort of series of stuff to let launch when I had a programmer. At that time also, there's a chap came and joined us called Guy Miller. He became the creative director at Core. He'd come from the world of Rare, working on things like Battletoads and Killer Instinct and all this lot. He knew how to pitch to Americans. I knew how to make games for British people, and the two of us kind of melded minds. And I was like, I like what you're doing here because you know the stuff that I don't know. And he was like, you know what goes on inside these games. Let's work together. So one of the things that Guy was pushing for was to try and get some much more diversity and interest into the games, because at that time, you know, the era of Flashback or whatever, everybody was a white guy with a buzz cut. So this is why when the early Tomb Raider kicked off, Guy was pushing for having a female character as the main lead in the new tomb plundering game or whatever, like that kind of thing. We put Public Enemy in a tank. And it was really, really cool. Me and James Ryman were listening to loads and loads of rap music and went, yeah, you know what, let's embrace all of this sort of stuff, throw in a little bit of Tank Girl, and I did all this. Anyway, in the background of this, Core had become a publisher, the pressure had gone up, and what had started as a lovely kind of like environment was slowly on the turn. Sad to say, all of the guys that I had started Core at the same time as I did had all left to go on to do other things. The two directors, Greg and Kev Norban, had left, and gradually things were going downhill and everybody was complaining. And there was a situation where a lot of people were talking about leaving and speaking to me and going, oh, this, that, and the other. So Guy and I said, oh, okay, then tell you what, let's look into the possibility of us leaving and maybe setting our own. So we poked around and put a few feelers out, and we thought, oh no, it ain't going to work. So we were like, okay, we'll polish our CVs. Core's become what you would now call a toxic workplace, and my mental health, as now I understand it, had gone right through the floor because the pressure to keep working, crunching and crunching was just horrendous. And a lot of promises were made that were never held up to. So anyway, I was in the process of looking to somewhere else, and I got called in one day. Where are you taking my boys? Okay. Right, so I got fired, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. The following day, the sun was shining, the birds were singing, and all of the weight that I'd been carrying for months and months and months and years and years and years, and the pressure of having to come in 7 days a week, could never work late enough, could never come in early enough, had all lifted off my shoulders. And oh, before we leave Core behind, what about Tomb Raider? I have a very, very tiny story about this, because all credit goes to Toby Gard for Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider came from the kind of, there's a bunch of us had gone out to CES E3, I can't remember where it was at that time, but it was the year that Virtua Fighter landed, and we were like, whoa, 3D characters, this is what we do. So the idea was that we just all came back assuming that everybody from that day was going to build a 3D character-based game where you'd follow around, you'd go through a city, you'd get in a car, you'd do a thing, you'd be raiding tombs, you'd do all this kind of stuff. Ironically, none of us knew that most people would go, oh, 3D characters, we'll make a side-on platform game with 3D characters in. Toby, bless him, started sketching up all of these ideas about kind of, oh, you could go through a tomb like this with an Indiana Jones style character, which Jeremy had been asking for a long time. So that all dovetailed, and Guy was like, yeah, but could we make it a girl? So brilliant. So they were kind of working towards it. And one day I was just called into the office, this was before I got fired, and Toby had drawn this amazing illustration of Laura Cruz at that time as Tomb Raider, kind of version of that picture on the far right there. And basically, she was a bit sort of pigtails and pith helmets, a bit sort of King Solomon's Mines, damsel in distress. And it was like, what do you think? So I was like, well, I love the idea. I think differentiating ourselves is great, but she doesn't look like she raids tombs. Have you heard of Tank Girl? So I was like, brought in all of my copy of Hewlett Martin's Tank Girl, dropped them on Toby's desk, and what he then did was took the spirit of Tank Girl, the ideas he'd got, Belle from Beauty and the Beast, because that was out in the summer that it started with a little bit of hair, pulled them together, and that's where Laura Cruz came from. And then after Guy and I left, she then became Lara Croft and what we know today. So that's my tiny little nudging in the universe of where Lara came from. So anyway, I got picked up by the chaps at Acclaim Studios Teesside, Iguana Entertainment. There's two lovely fellas, Jason and Darren Falkus. They'd set up Iguana many, many years ago, been bought by Acclaim, and they'd worked on NBA Jam. I turned up and they were like, okay, what are you, an artist or a designer? I was like, well, you've got better artists than me, I'll become a designer. So I became a designer planner and got through their college slam game, which was basically the third generation of NBA Jam. And it was all about just sort of getting kind of 5 different formats that had all set off and started converged round one single idea and out before Christmas. From then on to Shadow Man, which is our first original title at Teesside. With that one, we kind of like, the guys had got such talent, but hadn't pitched any original ideas. So Guy and I, coming from an environment where we pitched nothing but original ideas, were like, look, you've got the talent, let's see if we can put together some pitches. So we put together some pitches, sent them over to New York. New York came back and said, we love what you're doing, but we've got these comic books. They'd just done Turok Dinosaur Hunter for the N64, and that was a success based on the Valiant comics. So they sent us some other of the Valiant comics line that they'd sent. There were things like Trinity Angels, Bloodshot, and then Shadow Man, which was like about 5 issues in, written by Garth Ennis, illustrated by Ashley Wood, set in the voodoo steep Louisiana, about a guy called Mike Leroy, who would go between the world of the dead and the world of the living. So Guy and I were like, can we do this? So we came up with this kind of like 3D Zelda-inspired structured game that looked like Seven and all of that kind of like dark, scratchy psycho horror of the sort of like mid-90s. This was like my first proper working with the team. So all of that stuff that I'd looked at in that Star Wars Holiday Special, where you're kind of working with concept artists to make a story and to tell it, that's where that came in and was a real joy. The only other little story about this one was about halfway through the project, I was both designing and scheduling and managing the team. And I got to a certain point where I was sitting in my office going, we could have 6 enemies in, yes, but they would cost this much. And gradually kind of got to a point one afternoon where I convinced myself that doing nothing was probably the most profitable and best thing we could do. So I went to my lead artist, Nick Bagley, and went, Nick, I need some help. Will you be my project manager? So he came on board, became my project manager. I then worked on the design work, ended up doing some motion capture, and the other thing was inadvertently doing some voice work because my Bob Hoskins worked for Jack the Ripper. Second Shadow Man Second Coming, that was the next iteration of Shadow Man with the success of the first one. Can you do another one? So that's what we set on for. I basically just blitzed my way through creating a huge design and loads of multi-layered maps for the next adventure for Shadow Man. During this time, the Falkus brothers decided to leave the company and set up on their own. We understood why they were sick of working in big corporate environments. We said, okay, then good on you, but we'll stick it out here and, you know, wish you all the best. So they set up Atomic Planet. A few guys left with them, and for a few years they managed to make it work. In that time, though, we were getting a lot of rumblings about the bigger Acclaim, and you're going, well, it's going to last for so many years, but we can feel that they're slowly starting to come in. So it was time for Guy and I to kind of head off end of 2000 and find somewhere else. So Guy went off on his own. I went off to work for Infogram in Manchester, where I worked for about 10 weeks. I met a lovely guy named Tim, who was the head of the studio up there in Manchester. Oh, and of course, one other thing as well. During my time at Teesside, I was still living at home in kind of just between Nottingham and Derby. So I was working away for 5 days a week, coming home for weekends, and it was 5 years of weekends at home, which was the first time I'd ever had time at home during the weekends for years and years and years after course. So I got weirdly a work-life balance where I could just work from sort of 9 o'clock on a Monday morning till 5:30 on a Friday night unbroken. But once I started hitting the A19, nobody ever asked me to turn back. So that was kind of good. So when I was looking to return from Teesside, I was like, let's get some closer to home. Manchester. If anyone's tried to get from Nottingham to Manchester, you understand this is even more difficult than flying up to Teesside. But anyway, met the guys there and they said, oh, we've got this gigantic, this new console called the Xbox. Here's the controller. Gadunk. And kind of handed me, we want to do a Superman title on it. I was like, brilliant, okay, but you'll have to put together a team and everything. Yep, I'm up for it. So I put together a proposal for the Superman game. We started looking around for recruiting and everything, but we needed to get a solid proposal already. After a few weeks, I was like chatting away, and the subject came up that they were doing an animated series Superman game at the Sheffield offices, the old Gremlin offices. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I'm doing one based on the comic books, yeah. I met with the current set of writers at that time for DC, which was a great honour, and they explained to me the difference between the two types of Superman. Basically, Superman in the comics is a lot more honourable. He doesn't kill people. In the animated series, he has done, and that's basically because the TV writers just wanted to ignore things and make things easy and have loads of explosions. But there were a few subtle differences, but basically you had an S on the box, you had ultimate powers, laser vision, and you could fly, etc. So I said to Tim, I'm just going to go over to Sheffield to meet the team that's working on the animated series Superman, see how they're getting on. Well, they were in full flight, and I met Rob, the producer, and it was like, yeah, he knows what he's doing. In fact, he's solving most of the problems that I'm trying to solve here. Why are we making another one? So I went to Tim and said, why are we trying to put another game together? I could cost us, I don't know, let's go down to London. So we went down to London, I met two of the lovely people from marketing, we sat in this gigantic boardroom, I went, right, so let me get this straight. You want to give me X millions of dollars to make another Superman game with an S on the box when in Sheffield you've already got it full in flight, another game with an S on the box. Why don't you just convert that to the Xbox? They're like, we were wondering that too. So I saved them a load of money and kind of like, we're going back on the train and Tim's like, I'm ever so sorry. You can work on the Looney Tunes game. I'm like, it's okay, Tim. I've got a job at Electronic Arts. So Guy had gone down to Electronic Arts and started work on the Harry Potters. It was like, times, we need a lead designer, you up for it? So I'd been down there, and actually I said this to Tim, and Tim was like, oh, they're absolutely lovely, aren't they? I was like, yeah. He said, yeah, I interviewed with them for about a year ago, and he said, I thought it was brilliant, but this opportunity in Manchester was too good to put up. 2 years later, I met Tim back down at EA Chertsey. The Manchester studio had folded, and he'd come down, and he was working on the second floor. So yeah, I joined Electronic Arts at Chertsey, and then for the next 6 years worked on Harry Potter. I was lead designer on it, and leaning on the work that I'd done for Python and for Asterix, became the biggest fan of Potter. I'd been fortunate enough that Guy had given me the first two books for my 34th birthday, weirdly, about 2 years before that. And so I was already a fan of Potter and really appreciated them as really cool books, but for this I did the deep dive. So for every year from as the games came out, every book would arrive. You'd go to Asda of an evening, grab hold of it, and then spend the whole weekend with a notebook writing down all the references and everything like that, because we knew that we had to get it right. And in fact, actually, Guy and I became what were called the fiction police, because everything in the game had to go past J.K. Rowling. All of the dialogue had to have her approval and everything, and really based on what we were doing, it was like we've been given this incredible property. What we've got to do is to carry that torch. We've got to preserve it and make it happen. And if anybody has seen what's been happening with recently beloved franchises, they've not been taking that advice. But to me, it's that sort of thing of, if you're fortunate enough to work on one of these things, you preserve it, because you didn't come up with it. Thousands, millions and billions of people love it, so you do it just as you can. And we did our best creating the most explorable Hogwarts. We ended up working with the team on the movies and everything. It was a gargantuan project, and something that I look really gratefully on. Anyway, back at Acclaim, I'd met a guy called Alex Ward, and Alex was at their time their A&R guy down in London, and he popped up for Shadowman occasionally talking about sort of ways to promote the game and everything like that. He'd gone on to work for a company called Criterion, who had subsequently been bought by EA, and then one day in 2006 he phoned me up and said, do you want to play with cars and guns and explosions instead of wands? I was like, go on Alex, let's give it a go. So anyway, I went over to join the studio that did Burnout Paradise, and initially I was going to be working on the sequel to Black, their PlayStation 2 shooter, with Black 2. We had a small team and we were working on ideas whilst the big thundering behemoth that was Burnout Paradise was being done. And so I ended up working for Criterion Games for the next couple of years. One of the things was the Black 2 team, over a very short space of time, started getting eroded as programmers and designers started leaving for the bigger project. And gradually it was me and my mate Jez going, I think they want us over there. So Burnout Paradise launched, and myself and my buddy Jeremy Chubb actually ended up becoming kind of support for Paradise. So it was like, okay, so Do you know how to build a website? Nah, but I think I do. So I ended up doing that. Do you know how to do a video podcast? Yeah, but I think I do, and I'll do that. So I had a tremendous time for the next couple of years kind of supporting those guys in all sorts of different roles and through the year of paradise, which is a year of free DLC, supporting all of that. So then in 2009, well, end of 2008, 2009, I'd then been also working away from home on Potter and full Criterion, living down in Woking, family up in Derby, 5 days a week, and it was like kind of 13 years I'd been doing this crazy lifestyle. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to see if I can come home. So I got in touch with Hugh Binns of Eurocom, because Eurocom was a Derby-based developer, and we'd actually worked with them on the first of the Harry Potters because they co-developed Chamber of Secrets with us. So I actually spent some time in their office during that first year of Potter and said, oh, got anything for me? He's like, yeah. He was like, yeah, you can start, January the 2nd if you want. I was like, okay. So I said my goodbyes to Criterion. They sent me off. It was lovely, completely understood why I was doing it and everything like that. And we've been friends ever since. I went over, and so kind of January the 2nd, turned up at Eurocom, and it's like, up until then, Hugh had said, look, it's an amazing thing, you're going to be a lead designer on it, but I can't tell you what it is until you're through the door. We only want you to sequel one of the most legendary games in the entire of console history. Thanks, Hugh. So I was dropped with GoldenEye 007, not the good one. So yeah, that was my first day surprise after 13 years away. And so myself and Mike Robinson got our heads together and we were like, right, here are the list of things. There will be burning crosses on the lawn. If there aren't, headshots, paintball mode, multiplayer, blah, da, 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 da. And so we kind of came up with a list of what had to be absolutely in. And we were like, okay, we've got to do sort of a respectful conversion of the game featuring the new James Bond, whatever. The film producers came in and went, no, what we'd like you to do is to reimagine Bond for modern audiences. And we're like, hey, brilliant. So what we want you to do is Daniel's our new Bond, but also we never want a situation where Daniel is in a background that Piers was in the original film. So we'd like you to try and change it. Okay. So then began 18 months of wrangling and fangling. I actually did one thing. I did a complete deconstruction of the plot of the GoldenEye movie to explain to them how their movie worked and why it had to be certain things, because at some point I'm sure there was things like, well, it could be a hacker group that's got an AI called GoldenEye. And it's like, well, if you take that out, that doesn't work, this doesn't, and everything like that. So yeah, we came up, the original pitch for GoldenEye was to be a lot sort of stealth based and very, very visceral. One of the things we picked up from the amazing stuff in Casino Royale was the grappling Bond kind of fight, hand-to-hand fighting. So we thought we'll go first person, really depict that really well with all the gun handling. So you see all the gun and everything. So you feel like Daniel Craig whilst you're going through this kind of reimagined version of GoldenEye. So we kind of launched into that. The movie company then brought in a script writer. They brought in a production designer who was coming up with things. All the various different elements that could be changed would be changed, but we kept on going on. And then Modern Warfare 2 hit. And suddenly, wow, all that kind of scripted kind of, you stepped forward a foot and then something explodes or a helicopter comes in or whatever, was then being injected and requested of the thing. So we spent the last 9 months of the game from kind of like January the 1st of 2010 all the way through till September in the office 7 days a week, just packing in as much explosions as possible. I picked up on the tank level because at a certain point where we were kind of 50-50 on whether the tank level was going in, I hooked up with one programmer, one artist, and we delivered the whole thing with a little bit of help from the world team. But basically it was that sort of thing of, I'll take this and ram through this whilst Mike and the other guys took other levels and brought them home. So we got back after, say, 9 months of curries, working from a desk from 9 till 9 and exhaustion, and we're like, right, okay, we're done. And they're like, right, okay, we want you to convert it next to all the other formats and everything like this. I'm like, anyway, in the meantime, my buddy Alex had got in touch with me. I happened to be in Vegas and we were driving in a car. He went, when are you going to come back to Criterion? I was like, well, if you can move the office north, I'll be up for it, but I'd like to sleep in my own bed. He went, yeah, you can work from home, can you? So thought nothing of it. That was in the April, and we'd got trapped by Eyjafjallajökull, the volcano that went up and trapped us in San Francisco. But that's a completely other story. Anyway, I ended up having the easiest job interview ever, which was basically Dees from EA going, when do you want to start? So I rejoined the Criterion team on Need for Speed Most Wanted as their multiplayer designer, and worked from home during the week, and then just basically went down, stopped over one night down in the office of Criterion, had an absolute ball working with a small team of really focused and really genius programmers and artists to make all of the stuff. And whilst I was there, I also dipped my toe back into doing some art, because we ended up having to have about 500 rewards, all based around license plates. We didn't have the budget anywhere else to do it, so I was like, I've got Photoshop, I can take screenshots, I kind of know what I'm doing, a little bit rusty, but ended up sort of taking more screenshots and making more presentation art for all of these kind of unlockable license plates that went through the thing. So then, through 2013, I made loads of pitches and worked with Jez and with Alex, and there were loads of ideas that sort of went round. There were things that didn't land or whatever, like that kind of thing. And in 2013, Alex Ward and Fiona, who had been the CEO and creative director of Criterion and had seen the transition from the original Burnout into Electronic Arts, they left. And kind of I was in the same sort of situation I was with Teesside, where the founders had left, and you go, the character's gone now. So thought, what I'm going to do is going to take some time off. I'm going to retrain. So I came home and got to myself back into, basically fired up Unity, taught myself some C#, really went heavy into 3D modeling and stuff like that kind of thing. And about 6 months later, hey guys, do you want to come join us? So 7 of us formed Three Fields Entertainment. So I'm now working for Alex and Fiona, along with some sort of three programmers, myself and Paul Philpott. And in 2014, we became our own publisher and released a game called Dangerous Golf. The amazing thing about this is, of course, the time that we're in now is that there are game engines out there that are free. You only pay if you actually publish. If you've got a team of 7, it's not like trying to make the numbers that you would on a 150 or 200 team of like Potter or Need for Speed or something like that kind of thing. And so I've been working from home for the last 7 years on these kind of things. So for this, which was Dangerous Golf, which was doing the ultimate trick shot in a physics-filled environment. So you're in a dining hall, the hole's over there, you've got to launch your ball and smash through as many physics objects as possible and land the putt and score as much as possible. That's the gameplay. I ended up doing a load of the HUD work and all the front end, did the box art and everything like that. Then 2016, PSVR came out, so we did a quick kind of shooting gallery game, which went in as one of the early launch titles. That one I learned that all of those screens that you see in Marvel movies, where they're all see-through and you can see through the other side, they don't work in reality. It's like trying to focus on a shop window. So although we had big aspirations for making this funky Iron Man thing, we realized we had to put big panes of solid because, yeah, it doesn't work in real life. I don't know how Robert Downey Jr. does it. In 2017, we then went into the world of cars. We went and made Danger Zone, which is this gigantic facility where you launch cars at one another and try and create the biggest, craziest smash. I was let loose with the HUD and everything. I started doing loads of bits of programming to pull data from the game and create all sorts of charts and animated graphs that all kind of gave you this sort of Iron Man, future tech kind of front end thing, which was just really good fun to do, and ended up, I think, doing a load of liveries for the cars. 2018, because now we're turning games around in the speed that we used to do back in the day. We took it out on the open road and made Danger Zone 2, and then spent a little bit more time doing Dangerous Driving, which is a closed circuit game where you're taking other cars down, smashing them up and everything. I did a load of landscape work on this, on the HUD front end cover art, because everybody mucks in, even Alex and Fiona are actually working hands-on on the game. And then since 2020, I'm working on this game called Recreation, which is our most ambitious game yet. 7 of us working on a gigantic island that's 21 miles across, got hundreds of miles of road. You basically can go in, drive, race, crash, smash, online with 8 players. But the cool thing about it is you can build. So basically, if we go online, say we're going to decide we're going to do a jump challenge, you can start laying down ramps. In fact, I can start laying down ramps and hoop the hoops. Somebody else can be laying down a race course and we can do it. We can build gigantic whirling tracks into the sky, all the stuff that you can kind of do in Trackmania, but live. So we've actually had games where we're racing around the track while other people are building it and deleting pieces as we're going. We've got this in flight. Sometime next year it will come out, but it's tremendous fun. I only work 4 days a week now, and I'm doing all this crazy stuff with my friends. And then, so yeah, 36 years later, I'm still giving it a go, and I'll see where it ends. And then the other bits and pieces that I do in my spare time, I do a load of life drawing. I've done some covers for retro games and things like that kind of thing. I've done paintings of some of the old games, and for my 50th birthday 7 years ago, discovered the world of cosplay. So now I'm a stormtrooper for charity. I've built my own R2-D2 and stuff like that. So you can kind of follow me around on... oh, and the other one more thing, little shout out to Derby Computer Museum and Rob, who got me into all this lot. He kind of found out that Rick Dangerous was made in Derby when he formulated it, said, come in, and then this is how that's launched me into this world. So yeah, that's me. So I'm Phipps.com. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter and stuff like that kind of thing. Thank you for listening.
Simon, that was just amazing. Can I say, I think it's very appropriate that you've worked on Need for Speed and Burnout, because that was blistering. And completely smooth as well. We have on quite a bit, so I'm going to take maybe 3 questions. So if you would like to ask a question, can you use the traditional format by sticking your hand in the air, and I'll take 3 questions.
Yeah, it's okay,
right.
and I'll hang around, so if anybody wants to answer in person, just come over and have a chat.
Brilliant. You grab
cool.
that.
Yep,
so
cool.
would you like to answer a question? Ask a question. You can answer it.
On January the 4th, 2012, hopefully I've covered everything.
I think you have literally left them speechless, okay? I want to ask one really personal question. No, sorry. Can we go out together? No, it's that I bought my very first computer, a VIC-20, from First Bytes Computers on a Saturday in 1982.
Which probably
Did you serve
I am
me?
sure I probably did, yes. Yeah.
That's all I wanted to do. That's made me very, very happy. Okay, I think then I'll just say once again, Simon, what an incredible talk. Huge round of applause for Simon Phipps.
Thank you, guys.
I also think we should credit James for being incredibly supportive and patient over the last 36 years as well.
Oh, yes.
Okay, folks, well, our final guest will be Alex Trowers, who will be on here at 1 o'clock, who will be talking about his days at Bullfrog. So go and get a drink or whatever, go and play some games, but do join us for our final talk at 1 o'clock. Thank you. That was amazing.